This is my ranking of games like Civilization that I've played based purely on my personal experience. Each one is placed from masterpiece down to trash. Depending on how deep the strategy systems go, how satisfying long-term empire building feels, and how well each game keeps decision-making meaningful across every turn. Let's get straight into the list. Endless Space 2 immediately gave me that classic Civilization feeling of building something bigger over time, except here it happens across a huge galaxy filled with strange factions and political tension. I liked how every empire changed the way I approached expansion because no two campaigns ever felt identical. Some runs pushed me toward trade and diplomacy, while others slowly turned into wars over resources and territory. The political system also added more pressure than I expected, since internal groups kept changing my priorities during long campaigns. Even though the combat lacked direct control, I still enjoyed watching massive fleet battles unfold after spending time designing ships. The interface looked clean, the soundtrack matched the atmosphere nicely, and the constant decision-making kept me busy for hours without stopping. This lands in my excellent tier. Humankind caught my attention with the way every new era let me reshape my civilization instead of locking me into a single identity. I liked switching cultures over time because it changed how I approached expansion, diplomacy, and warfare during each campaign. The influence system added more strategy than I expected since I had to think carefully about borders, political pressure, and keeping cities stable while growing larger. Battles also had more tactical depth than I first assumed because terrain and positioning actually mattered during fights. I did wish the AI pushed back harder since many wars felt easier than they should have, especially later in the game. The relaxing pacing and satisfying empire building kept me coming back for multiple campaigns without getting bored. This belongs in my great tier on this list. ZEPHON started with a setting that genuinely interested me, because the mix of post-apocalyptic survival, alien horror, and machine warfare gave the world a darker tone than most strategy games in this genre. I liked how dangerous the map felt early on since neutral enemies constantly forced me into battles while trying to expand. The combat also had decent tactical depth because positioning, terrain, and unit composition mattered during larger fights. I appreciated the amount of lore packed into the leaders, technologies, and random events too, since they added more personality to each campaign. The problem was that many matches began feeling too similar after several hours, because nearly everything revolved around preparing for one massive war near the end. Diplomacy also felt pretty limited, which made parts of the experience less interesting over time. This falls into my mediocre tier. Old World immediately felt different to me because it focused less on rushing through history and more on the people shaping it. I liked watching rulers age, families compete for power, and political decisions slowly change my empire over time. The order system also made every turn more strategic since I constantly had to decide which armies, cities, or problems deserved attention first. Battles felt stronger than I expected because positioning units correctly could completely change the outcome of a war without making combat overly complicated. I also enjoyed how cities developed differently depending on how much time and resources I invested into them. The interface took time to understand, and some mechanics felt overwhelming early on, but once everything clicked together, the campaigns became difficult to stop playing. This lands in my excellent tier. Age of Wonders, Planetfall, kept me interested because it mixed empire building with tactical battles that actually felt fast and exciting instead of dragging on forever. I liked how every faction changed the way I approached combat, since some armies focused on ranged firepower while others pushed aggressive melee attacks and swarm tactics. The story campaigns were also stronger than I expected because they gave the world more personality through political conflicts, strange characters, and sci-fi mysteries. Battle stayed fun for a long time thanks to the amount of unit variety and customization available during campaigns. I just wish the Empire management side had more depth because colony building sometimes felt too simple compared to the combat systems. The random maps also lost momentum once the main story scenarios were finished. This takes a place in my great tier. Heart of the Machine gave me a very different strategy experience because instead of building a normal empire, I was spreading an AI network across a massive futuristic city. I liked how the game slowly introduced its mechanics since there were so many systems to learn early on. Expanding through signal ranges, controlling android units, and secretly taking over parts of the city made the gameplay feel unique compared to most 4X games I've played. I also enjoyed the freedom to approach situations through stealth combat negotiations or strange experiments that changed the direction of a campaign. The problem was that the amount of menus, mechanics, and management sometimes became exhausting during longer sessions. Certain systems also became harder to track once the city grew larger and more crowded. This lands in my good tier. Era History Untold kept me interested early on because the world looked incredibly detailed and alive compared to most strategy games in this genre. I spent a lot of time simply watching cities grow, while tiny animations and moving citizens made the map feel more believable. I also liked the deeper economic systems, since producing goods and managing supply chains added more planning than I expected. Building industries around food, tools, and resources gave the campaigns a satisfying sense of progression during the early hours. The problem was that the management side slowly became exhausting once my empire expanded across multiple cities. Too many menus needed constant attention, and the game did not make tracking important information easy enough later on. Combat and diplomacy also felt much simpler than the economic systems surrounding them. This settles into my good tier. Terra Invicta felt massive in scope because I wasn't just managing countries on Earth, I was also shaping humanity's future across the solar system during an alien invasion. I really liked the political side of the game since manipulating governments, controlling factions, and influencing global events created constant tension during campaigns. The different ideologies behind each faction also made the world more interesting because every group had its own vision for dealing with the alien threat. Expanding into space became fascinating once I understood the mechanics, especially when building stations, mining colonies, and fleets around distant planets. The biggest problem was how overwhelming everything could become since the game explained many important systems poorly. The interface also made tracking critical information harder than it should have been during long campaigns. This earns a place in my excellent tier. Stellaris gave me some of my favorite moments in any strategy game because every new galaxy felt unpredictable from the very beginning. I loved discovering strange alien civilizations, exploring mysterious star systems, and slowly shaping my empire around different ideologies and species traits. The storytelling during exploration was easily the strongest part since random events and discoveries constantly created memorable situations that changed relationships between empires. I also enjoyed building multi-species civilizations because balancing different populations and planetary needs made expansion feel more meaningful. The game definitely slowed down during longer campaigns, especially once managing larger territories became more repetitive, but the atmosphere and freedom kept me invested anyway. Few strategy games capture the feeling of exploring an unknown galaxy as well as this one did for me. This belongs in my masterpiece tier. Millennia had a few ideas that genuinely interested me, especially the alternate ages that could completely change the direction of a campaign. I liked seeing history branch into strange scenarios because it gave the game more variety than I expected early on. The production chains and city needs system also added more planning since I had to manage food, sanitation, education, and resources carefully while expanding. Combat was surprisingly decent too, because the AI actually pushed back during wars instead of sitting passively across the map. The biggest issue was how messy and exhausting the Empire management became later in the game. Cities turned into overcrowded tile spam, the technology system felt confusing, and too many resources existed without clear explanations. Performance also became painfully slow during long campaigns. This ends up in my mediocre tier. Galactic Civilizations IV kept me busy for hours because expanding across massive sectors of space felt rewarding during the early stages of a campaign. I liked discovering new planets, building colonies, and slowly growing a small empire into something much larger over time. The core world system also reduced some of the usual micromanagement, since smaller colonies could support major worlds without needing constant attention. I spent a lot of time customizing planets and planning production layouts because that side of empire management felt satisfying. The ship designer was another feature I enjoyed since it gave me freedom to experiment with fleet designs during wars. The biggest issue was that many systems felt underdeveloped during longer campaigns, especially diplomacy and warfare. Some mechanics also lacked enough depth to stay interesting later on. This lands in my great tier. The Battle of Polytopia was easy to get into because the mechanics were simple enough that I understood the basics within minutes without needing long tutorials. I liked how fast matches moved since building cities, researching technologies, and expanding territory all happened quickly compared to larger 4X games. Exploring the map and finding new cities during the early stages was surprisingly fun, especially when resources started growing and armies became stronger. The clean design also made everything feel accessible without overwhelming me with complicated systems at once. The biggest problem was how repetitive matches became later on because technology and upgrades reached their limits too quickly. Combat also started feeling messy once ranged units and catapults dominated the battlefield during larger wars. The simpler structure still made it enjoyable during shorter sessions. This lands in my good tier. Age of Wonders 4 gave me many reasons to experiment with new campaigns, because the amount of customization created different fantasy civilizations to build. I liked mixing cultures, magical tomes, and racial traits together since it made nearly every playthrough feel different from the last. The tactical battles were also satisfying because positioning units and combining abilities created fights that felt more strategic than simple number advantages. I spent a lot of time creating unusual rulers and watching them evolve across campaigns through the Pantheon system. The pacing worked really well too, since campaigns move faster than many other large strategy games without feeling shallow. Some combinations of mechanics felt unbalanced, and certain map modifiers became frustrating to manage during longer runs. The strong world building and creative freedom placed this in my excellent tier. That's my full ranking of Civilization-style strategy games based on empire depth and long-term decision-making. Each game builds strategy in its own way, from deep system-heavy design to more focused empire management. Thanks for watching.